Well, I guess what I would say is they definitely tell you about this, but you never think it's going to happen to you. My name is Jim Martin. I'm a detective for the City of Wausau Police Department. I've lived in Wausau for my entire life. I was born here, I was raised here, I graduated high school here, and then eventually went to college here before I started working for my hometown police department. As a patrol officer, I was fortunate enough to actually patrol the neighborhood that I grew up in and answer calls for service from some of my neighbors. I became a police officer because in my youth I unfortunately made some mistakes, and I had some memorable contacts with Wausau PD that helped steer me down a better path. And I look at this career as a way to give back to my community. Today we're going to talk about something that you are trained for in the police academy, but that you never feel like will happen to you on the job. This is Behind the Call. So in 2016, as a patrol officer, I was assigned to the east side of the city. And as I typically like to do, I tried to take my dinner break before every restaurant in the city closed. If you're a night shift officer, after about 9 p.m., you really don't have a lot of dining options. So in the evening, I was taking my dinner break with Officer Brady Kopus, who also worked the east side of Wausau with me as a night shift patrol officer. And while we were eating dinner at Noodles, we heard a call that involved domestic violence and one party threatening to kill another party with a knife. As the call developed, it was determined that officers would go to the suspect's apartment and search that apartment for the suspect. Because I'd been at dinner, I didn't know all the details of the call, but I knew that it was serious. I knew that there was a threat of a weapon, and my understanding was that there was a party that needed to be taken into custody. We went to the 700 block of Gilbert Street and searched the suspect's apartment where he was not located. And it was determined that 2 officers would go to another address where the victim was and make contact with her to make sure that she was safe, since there had been a threat against her from the suspect. I stayed behind and checked the area for the suspect, thinking that he may return to his apartment. Shortly after the other officers left the scene, I was by myself and I located the suspect around the 700 block of Brown Street. I had a brief foot pursuit with the suspect where he managed to get inside of an apartment building that I did not have a key for. I just wasn't able to chase him. He was much quicker than me. I had to get out of my squad car and run up a flight of stairs in order to catch him, and he was able to lock the apartment building door behind him. But I knew based on the totality of the investigation it was important for us to take him into custody. And so I noticed that one of the apartment windows was open. And I asked another resident to let me in a door on the second floor that would at least get me into the building so I could see if I could locate the suspect inside the building. I waited for the resident on the second floor to open the outside door for what seemed like a long time, but in reality it was probably just a few minutes. And when he opened the door on the second floor of the apartment building, I immediately saw that the neighbor and the suspect were in the hallway that leads to the apartment building's entrance. At this time, I was in an awkward position because the exterior door to get into the breezeway that led to this apartment building was at the top of a flight of stairs. So to my back, I had a flight of stairs, and in front of me, I had a doorway where a domestic violence suspect was standing. And I made the choice to immediately try to take him into custody. Shortly after I told him he was under arrest, I could see that he was fumbling in his sweatshirt pocket, which for me, knowing that a knife was involved with this incident, or at least the threat of a knife was involved, set off some warning alarms for me. I should say that at this time, I'd been a police officer with Wausau PD for around 1 year. So I was technically still just a probationary officer. I did not have a lot of experience. I had recently graduated the academy, and I was fairly new to the profession. But when I saw him dig in his pocket, I immediately told him not to reach for the knife. I could tell he was manipulating something in his sweatshirt pocket, and he looked up and he said something to me about either having to shoot him or having to kill him. And at that time, he drew the knife out of his sweatshirt pocket and held it over his head with the blade down and started walking towards me. The problem I had was that to my back, I still had a staircase, and I really couldn't walk forward because now I had a suspect holding a knife just feet away from where I was standing. So I drew my firearm, and I told him to drop the knife, which he did not do. And I remember thinking that I might have to shoot him, and I was worried that the neighbor who had opened the door for me was still standing behind him. And I was afraid that if I missed when I shot at the suspect to save myself, that I could hit the neighbor and injure him. And I wound up having to fire my gun kind of one-handed going down the stairs to get away from the suspect as he was walking towards me. In the moment, I didn't have a lot of time to think. I felt like I just went through exactly what I had been trained to do. I received really good training in the police academy, and I had a lot of muscle memory to deal with a situation like this. And it was kind of like an out-of-body experience while I was shooting at the suspect. I knew that he was coming at me with a knife, and my training told me what to do, but it was so fast that it was difficult to understand what was happening. I remember him standing and looking at me, still holding the knife. And I remember thinking this was the part in all my training scenarios where he was supposed to give up or fall down. But I remember him just kind of standing and looking at me until eventually he collapsed to the ground. I holstered my firearm, and I remember checking on the neighbor to see if he was okay, and he told me he was. I remember walking up to the suspect who I had just shot and taking the knife out of his hand and trying to throw that down the hallway to get it away from where we were standing. And then I decided that I should probably let dispatch know I'd been involved in a shooting, and so I radioed in, and then I felt extremely stressed. Kind of like how you would feel maybe after running a few miles on a treadmill, or my heart rate being really high. But I remember hearing sirens in the background and knowing that every officer on my shift was coming to try and help me. And as I looked down to start assessing the medical needs of the suspect, which was something I had been trained to do after being involved in a shooting, I saw 3 officers begin coming up the stairs to assist me. And at that point, we moved from a situation where I was trying to protect my life and shoot the suspect to trying to save the suspect's life. And we used every piece of medical equipment we had in our vests, chest seals and combat gauze and this kind of thing to try to stop bleeding. And I remember us working there for a period of time trying to get him alive. Eventually the ambulance crew, I think, came, but before they came, another officer took my place and I was brought back to the police department. I remember that my gun was taken from me by the lieutenant, and I remember trying to explain what I had done to my supervisor and what had happened, just having kind of an out-of-body experience. A member of the union came and explained to me that the Department of Criminal Investigation would be investigating the shooting. I remember meeting with several DCI agents and having them take photographs of me. I had my blood drawn at the hospital to make sure that I had not been intoxicated during this incident. I learned later that the department had gone and notified my family in person of what I'd been involved in. I just remember sitting at the department for a lot of hours, speaking to the DCI agents and waiting to wrap things up. I think I might have got home at about 3 a.m. And then after that, I can honestly say that I don't think I slept for 3 or 4 days. I was definitely trained to be involved in an incident like that. I followed my training, but what I wasn't ready for was what comes after being involved in a shooting. I remember there being a lot of stress that I was being investigated, especially being a new officer, by the Department of Criminal Investigation, knowing that reports were going to be sent to the district attorney, knowing that everything I did was going to be analyzed. That was stressful, but what was more stressful for me was that everywhere I went for a long time, I just didn't feel safe. Be eating dinner at a restaurant with my family and be looking for a threat around me. I would be sitting at my home and I couldn't watch like action movies that had firearms in them for a couple months. It took me a long time to get over those feelings, and the department treated me very well. Can't thank my coworkers enough for looking in on me and making sure that I was doing okay. I know when I came back to patrol, there would be days where I was stressed about returning to work, and my teammates would look after me and make sure I was doing all right. Years later, I managed to figure out a decent coping method. I took up hunting, which was a lot of fun, but that meant I had to take hunter safety because I had never hunted before. So as a 28-year-old man, I took hunter safety with a group of 11-year-old children that was taught by colleagues of mine at the Sheriff's Department, which was a rather humbling experience. I took up some other hobbies, spent more time camping. Over the years, I managed to put that incident behind me, but I don't think a lot of people understand what it feels like to be the officer involved in one of those incidents. I knew that what I did in the moment when I pulled that trigger was the right thing to do. It's what my training taught me to do. But I didn't feel good about it. I was given an award for being involved in that shooting, and I always felt kind of guilty that I had been awarded for valor after killing somebody. I'm glad that nobody else got hurt in that incident. I'm glad the victim in that case is safe. And I remember that night thinking that the guy who was the neighbor that opened the door for me must be pretty angry with me for asking him to open that door and putting him in that position, but he stuck by me and was a witness to what happened. At that time, we didn't have body cams, and I'm going to be thankful for the rest of my life to him for coming forward and telling the DCI investigators the truth of what I did that night, because he was the only person besides me who saw what happened. There was a lot of community support that came out of it, but you know, regardless of the support that I had from my coworkers or my community, it changed me as a person, if you ask my family. And after I came back to work from that shooting, the job was a lot more stressful. It changed my perspective on the things that I was doing. I'm happy to say now that I'm over that incident. I would say that I still like being a police officer. I like being a detective. I like having the opportunity to help people. I think law enforcement is a very noble profession, and if you're a noble person who does it right, it can be very rewarding. Getting into this field, there's something to be said for having your academy skills and your physical skills ready. But I think you have to be prepared for the long road ahead of you and the things that you're going to see. And I know that when I came into this field, I was not ready for that. I think that there's a lot of talk in a lot of circles involving law enforcement about how hard this job is and about how difficult the things that you see and witness can be. But I think that what a lot of people forget when they talk about the things that are difficult with this job is that each one of those difficult calls can be an opportunity for change. You're definitely going to see domestic violence. You're going to see horrific things like child abuse. You might be involved in investigating a homicide. But in each one of those cases, as a law enforcement officer, you have the opportunity to take that domestic violence victim and get them away from that abuser and into a new life. When you witness child abuse, you have the opportunity to take that child and put them in a better home, partnering with social services. And when you investigate more serious crimes like homicide, you get to make sure that at the end of the day, the person who took another life is held accountable for what they did. A career in law enforcement is all about perspective. And for me, I know this career has changed the way that I see the world for good ways and bad ways. But I think that having that perspective that even though you're going to see and do difficult things, the goal should always be to use those opportunities to make your community better. I live here. This is my town. I think you'd be hard-pressed to find a career where you can wake up every day and go to work and after a morning cup of coffee, change somebody's life forever. So I guess I would just say come into this career with your eyes open and take all the good with the bad.